Let's get started. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Charlotte Cass from the Royal Parks as our guest speaker tonight. Charlotte comes from a biology background, having received a degree in biological sciences from the University of Durham. After this, she was a tutor at the Field Studies Council before moving to her current role at the Royal Parks. So Charlotte's been working for the Royal Parks as a learning officer for 3 years now as part of their learning and engagement team, which is based in Hyde Park. Their work in 2019 to 20 alone reached 34,000 adults and children. Now, my preconception of learning and engagement work is that it's all about school children, but there's far more to it than that, as Charlotte is going to explain to us tonight. So without further ado, if I can hand over to Charlotte.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks very much for inviting me to talk today. I'm absolutely delighted to be here with you all this evening, and I hope that you find what I have to say today interesting and hopefully informative as well. As Joy mentioned, I sit within the learning team at the Royal Parks, but we've actually got a number of teams within the parks who actively work in trying to engage people with the incredible nature we've got within them. And that's because engagement is quite a broad term. We really don't think about it as being there's one single way to do it. And that's the reason why we've got so many teams. We're really interconnected with lots of communication, and we're always sharing resources and knowledge and supporting each other. But each team approaches engagement from a slightly different angle. And that's also that we can cast the engagement net as far and as wide as possible, so that as many people as possible can be involved. So I'm going to be spending the next about 45 minutes talking to you about the range of ways that we're working to engage people with nature. And then I'll be opening up the floor to questions. So please do keep note of any thoughts or questions or suggestions so that we can discuss them at the end, because I'd really love to hear them. Now, as a quick disclaimer, I've not been directly involved in absolutely every event or activity that I'm going to be talking about this evening. Even if I never ate or slept, I don't think I'd ever have had the time. But in those cases where I wasn't there, I've approached the person who did lead them and discussed it with them for this talk, so that because I'd really like to convey the full scope of all the things that we're offering. At the Royal Parks, we are, in essence, a doorway to nature in the middle of the city. And I'm sure I'm not the only one, but the moment I step into the park, it's an instant, it's a weight lifted off my shoulders. And bear in mind, that's me walking into work each day. And the parks aren't just beneficial for people. We're an inner city refuge for a myriad of creatures and plants and fungi. My primary role as learning officer is to engage students with the park. So teachers bring their students into the park and I deliver curriculum-focused sessions for them. But our goal and aim is so much further than the curriculum. It's very much about experiential learning and giving students the opportunity to form a connection with the world around them. The idea of people becoming dissociated with nature was coming up more and more frequently before the pandemic. And I think that we might be at a turning point because the value of nature has become so much more apparent and in the forefront of people's minds in the past 10 months than it has perhaps in the last 10 years, especially when people are faced with the choice of the four walls they live within or nature. But it's imperative we don't sit on our laurels when the world does reopen, because the importance of access to nature and that connection to nature, you could try to measure it in any number of ways, but I think all of them would be an underestimate. Though as members of the Royal Society of Biology, I very much suspect that I'm preaching to the choir right now. So let's instead talk about one of those reasons it's valuable, and that is nature's ability to facilitate people's engagement with biology, because it's like a bridge. It's something that's there and accessible that they can look at and touch and feel and experience. as I mentioned, I teach a lot of schools, and as I mentioned, I teach a lot of schools, and whenever I get a class where the students are all just sort of sitting back and they're pretending that I don't know that they're looking at their phones underneath the table, or who are just generally not in a mind space to be learning about biology, I could deliver the best lecture in the world and it would have absolutely zero impact. So what I do is I get them all up, I drag them outside, and I let them hold a newt. And suddenly, they're children again. They're excited, they're asking questions, they're screaming, they're cheering, they're taking pictures. And that's when they're ready to start learning about biology, when they're asking me questions. What is it? Is it a lizard? Why is it orange underneath? Where did you find it? Ah, funny you should ask that, because that's what we're doing today. We're going to do a scientific investigation about newts, so pop them back, get to the classroom to write a hypothesis, then come back down here and test it. And then they're able to engage with biology, even the more abstract aspects like eutrophication and photosynthesis, because they've got something to focus on. They've got an emotional link to that quite incredible moment they just experienced. And that single simple moment of holding a newt caused such an impact that not only will it help them to learn that one day, but I expect quite a lot of them will still remember that moment right through their adult lives. I remember my year 9 biology field trip. I found a bullhead fish and it was awesome. And I remembered the kick sampling method we employed that day to catch that fish, and I was able to recite it to the letter 4 years later in my biology A-level exam, because that was the first time I'd ever caught a fish. And that moment is still ingrained in my memory. That's how important and impactful a moment can be. And to be honest, I think that that one day, perhaps even that one moment, set in motion the route that took me to where I am today. And I'll admit, I don't just use that technique on kids. This opportunity to experience and form a deeper connection with nature and learn about the biology of the park isn't limited to school children, because people don't stop learning just because they're not in school. They never stop learning or yearning to learn, which is why I'm also involved in our community engagement program, where our goal is to make experiencing nature and learning about nature and biology accessible for everyone. Many of our visitors experience the moment of walking into the park and the enjoyment of being in the park. But walking round or through the park is sometimes the limit of their engagement. The connection is transient, and we'd like to give them a deeper, more lasting and affecting connection. One way to do that is through ownership. Insofar as one can own nature, the term doesn't really sit well with me, but the way I mean it is in that innate need to hold or hoard or hold close things that you're emotionally connected to. For example, whenever I've lost a relative and been packing up their remaining possessions to be sent to charity shop, I've always taken something, almost a little token. A ceramic rabbit with a broken ear, an old pocket watch without any hands, a tarnished silver sixpence, things with absolutely no value to anyone else, but to me, because of the connection and association I have with them, the most precious possessions I own. That's the sort of ownership that I'm referring to. It's that link to happy memories, that emotional bond to something physical. People like to pick flowers so that they can take something beautiful away with them, because they want to possess that beauty in some way. But I'd argue that the ability to name the flower meets that same need without harming it. It gives you that same sense of connection or ownership. And I think that that's what we're trying to tap into when we do our adult walks. Sharing the knowledge, we have to deepen people's connection to the nature around them. To a passerby, a tree is just a tree among many, many trees, about 3,174 trees and rising in Hyde Park alone. But in our walks, we lead you to our favourites. we introduce the two of you. You find out their name, learn to read their history from the cankers on their trunk, learn of their struggles with the leaf miners and processionary moths, Dutch elm disease and ash dieback, those ruddy squirrels. And next time you walk through the park and past that tree, you know its history and troubles. And it's no longer just a tree, it's a friend who you can call by their name. And soon, none of the trees are just a tree among 1,000 other trees. They've all got a name and a life that they're living. You just haven't discovered them yet. And it's not just trees. One of our most popular walks is our bud walk, which we do in the summer months. And we get such a range of people. It's technically for adults, but people will sometimes bring their teenagers along, and there's people from all over the world who are in London for just a few days, and they decided to spend one of those nights walking around the park looking for bats. We've got young people meeting friends after work, retired people, couples, bat fanatics, people who are terrified of bats, so of course their friends have booked them onto a bat walk, but we try and keep it light-hearted. We do a little true-false quiz to get some initial knowledge and some fast facts over to them, and we give each group a bat detector, teach them how to use it, and walk along the edge of the serpentine. There is nothing quite like 30 strangers standing in a huddle in an empty park, in the dark, in absolute silence. You'd hear a pin drop, waiting to hear that moment when one of the detectors suddenly starts clicking. And nothing can beat that feeling beside the poplar trees. Everyone's looking up, and the detectors all going wild, and the silhouettes of bats against the sky, and the whoops and gasps from the group as the bat swoops by them. It never gets old, and that pure awe and wonder at the natural world. And we tell them interesting nuggets and facts as we're walking between the locations and answer any questions that they've got. And some of that knowledge will stay and some of it will fade. But that moment, that experience or that feeling, that isn't going anywhere fast. So walks are a great way that we found to bring a wide range of people who might otherwise not be that interested in going to the park and giving them a chance to learn things. But not everyone is interested in coming on an informative walk. So how do we engage those people? And that's where our volunteering team come into play. Because people normally have at least some form of engagement with nature in order to sign up to come on a walk, to learn about it. But volunteering is a way to engage people who don't have an interest already, because its premise isn't come to the park and learn, it's more come and do. It's about offering opportunities to do something fun and physical and helpful, and the fact that they're learning about nature and ecology and conservation is just an added bonus. And it's a really popular and successful way of engaging people with nature and the parks. So much so that about 2,300 people give a colossal 127,000 hours of time volunteering in the parks every year. And if you think newts work, try hedgehogs. I am a hedgehog hero. It's not part of my job description. I work all day in the park and then volunteer my evening and night to run around the park surveying hedgehogs. It's just that much fun. And I think it's a testament to how enjoyable it is that I'm not the only one. Office staff and finance and so many of my colleagues volunteer their time alongside members of the public from literally all walks of life, giving up their time to help with our hedgehog survey. This is a project that's been going on for about 6 years now, which we do in partnership with the Zoological Society of London, the Garden Wildlife Health Project, the Central Royal Parks Wildlife Group, and 2 wildlife scientists, Dr. Nigel Reeve and Professor John Gannell. It started in 2014 when over 150 volunteers found a population of 30 to 40 hedgehogs living and breeding in Regent's Park. The volunteer team run surveys for a couple of nights in May and September every year to see how the population's faring and feed that research back into park management strategies. The volunteers are sent out in teams with a supervisor, who's often just a really experienced volunteer. They get thermal imaging cameras and torches, and they sweep a set route in either the 8 PM till midnight slot or the midnight till 4 AM slot. Any hedgehogs that they see, they capture, weigh, note down the tag number or tag it if it's a first capture, determine its sex, location, and consider its overall condition. And what's remarkable is that this opportunity is open to absolutely anybody, and they don't need any experience. If they knew, then they do an evening of training before they do their first survey, and they're always put in a team with at least one experienced volunteer. So it's a great way for people from any background to come and get involved and have hands-on experience with meaningful, real science and research, and learn about ways of measuring populations. And another really popular volunteering opportunity is the volunteer rangers in Richmond and Bushy Park. There are about 100 active volunteers, and they're amazing. They have such an impact. They talk to and engage with literally thousands of park visitors. But what's amazing is that lots of them came in because the park is local to them and valuable to them as a local space. But they've ended up learning so much, and they know everything, and they're always asking for more information on things, and then going out and passing it all on to the tourists and other visitors in the park. They're such a valuable method of engaging people because it's not only the volunteers getting more engaged, they're also engaging any other member of public they happen to come across while they're volunteering. And it's a great way and positive way to encourage other people to interact positively with the park. But we found that volunteers in general do want to make a real difference, and the time that they've given to us to have some measurable outcomes. And that's why the citizen science projects are always very much in demand. The arboricultural team had volunteers identify, measure, and map every tree in Hyde Park for the iTree report, where they're able to measure the ecosystem services of the trees and quantify it into an actual value. The Mission Invertebrate team, which is a project under the Royal Parks that's funded by the People's Postcode Lottery, they do invertebrate studies and butterfly transects to feed into management strategies. They did the anthill surveys in Richmond Park, where volunteers were mapping and measuring the size of the anthills. They found out that Richmond Park has 400,000 anthills containing over 1 million yellow meadow ants. And they were able, through their volunteering, to create an anthill index, which they could use to estimate the age of the anthills. And then the next year, they were able to investigate the relationship between anthills built by the yellow meadow ant and the history and management of acidic grasslands in Bushy Park. In 2019, we had volunteers doing hawthorn surveys, mapping where they were, and then that data was used to implement planting regimes, trying to create habitat corridors and stop islands between hawthorn. And because hawthorn's one of the best species for biodiversity, a single individual can have about 300 different species on it at one time. And this is because it's old, native species. And there's a correlation between the length of time a tree has evolved in a country and the number of species that you find on them. And this is one of the great things about citizen science projects. Volunteers are able to access quite deep and specialist knowledge. They're not just counting hawthorn trees, they're learning about biodiversity and evolution and the benefits of hawthorns having both flowering and fruiting periods, and the habitat management reasoning, like how invertebrates have home ranges and can't fly too far, so to widen the gene pool, we have to create habitat corridors. But what about the people who have more of a passing fancy to be involved, rather than the desire to seek out that in-depth knowledge? How do you capture them and get a broader level of engagement? Long-term or more complex surveys get the interest of people who are already interested. But what about those who are interested but don't really have the time or inclination to commit to doing detailed surveys every week? Volunteering is shifting. people don't really have time to do regular volunteering as much as they used to, and engaging people can happen in different ways, both in the long term and short term. And one-off volunteering opportunities are a great way to offer real flexibility for opportunities to learn. They're great for people who are new, but who want to come and help, and it gives them a chance to get their foot in the door, almost like taster volunteering, and then often they'll get hooked. The flower insect timed or fit count, for example, is a really simple survey where volunteers count all of the insects that visit a patch of target flowers over a 10-minute period. It's not a massive time commitment, which means that it's something that a lot of people can do. The data isn't as high quality. The insects are just identified into broad groups like bumblebees or hoverflies, but an awful lot of people can engage with it, and that can bring in a lot of data. Now, Mission Invertebrate divide their offering into citizen science and adult learning, where the purpose of citizen science is to collect really good quality data and teach the volunteers a good, strong skill set. And adult learning is more of a one-off introduction, where the primary purpose is to engage people, and the secondary purpose is to get data. So, for example, they do solitary bee walks, where volunteers can join an expert on a survey and learn while walking around looking for bees and nests and flowers, where the volunteers get to experience a survey and can talk to and ask questions of an expert. It's the same with the Moth Nights, which are again led by an expert. The volunteers come and learn about and help set up the moth trap in the evening, and then come back the next morning to help identify the species that were caught. Or our conservation groups, where people will volunteer to come and muck in and help us do the habitat management. The whole time they're asking questions and learning techniques and IDing different species and finding out about which species are benefiting from the work they're doing that day. And then there are the adult engagement events, where Emma and I try to capture people who don't really have a passing interest in invertebrates at all. And they do this through things like microphotography of invertebrates or invertebrate drawing classes, where groups of friends will book on to just come and have some fun in the evening after work. But circulating the room, there's both an artist and a biologist. And it's not a case of teaching or learning, it's more just a case of having conversations and answering questions. It's getting people to engage not just by looking or counting, it's just getting them to look closely and think. Sometimes our volunteers don't even actually volunteer themselves. With corporate volunteering, businesses will send their employees to volunteer in the park for the day as an away day or a team building opportunity. Those days are great fun, and we'll see people and these employees coming back year on year because they just enjoy it so much. They get to spend the day with their colleagues doing woodland management, using tools and coppicing hazel, or meadow management by raking the meadow behind the shire horses as they cut it. And they're not only helping nature and learning about nature, but the company is actually donating money to the Royal Parks charity so that we can afford to have meadows and create and maintain those valuable habitats. So in a day of corporate volunteering, there's an immense sense of achievement because they've not only helped to mow a meadow, they've helped to keep these incredible places going and safeguard them so that they can still be here for future generations. So there is a sense of responsibility and understanding for the amount of work it takes to have a good wildflower meadow, but it's not just a case of an area of grass that we don't have to bother about. And it gets people to have a much deeper understanding of what it is and why it's so very valuable. And what better way to have a sense of ownership than to be able to say, I planted those daffodils, or I built that dead hedge. There's something physical they can look at and say, I did that. And did you know, dead hedges are actually valuable habitat and a great way to encourage invertebrates. People will be inspired and excited and talk about it with anyone that they're with when they happen to pass the dead hedge that they built. And then they're able to pass that enthusiasm and that knowledge that they've gained to someone else. I know it sounds quite small, but sometimes it can just take a moment or a small thing to change the course of people's lives. For example, we've had a volunteer who, after and because of the volunteering in the parks, was inspired to go back to university to study conservation ecology so that they could change the entire focus of their career. A similar thing happened with one of our learning volunteers. She volunteered to help us deliver the school sessions while she was looking for a job. She went on to get a position at the Royal Park's horticultural apprenticeship scheme and now works in the park and is at the beginning of a career in horticulture and park management. Some of our learning volunteers have volunteered once a week for years, longer than I've been at the parks. And some came in on one of our adult walks, heard about it and got involved. And the feedback from them is always not only that they love to come and help with the kids, it's that they enjoy how much they learn. And it's that every time they come, they discover something new to see, or see something that they've never seen before. Our learning volunteers also help with the engagement program, which is all about bringing in people who wouldn't normally necessarily come into the park. People who think that it's not for them. Those that might not want to sign up for a walk or to volunteer. And we're trying to work on how can we give those people that moment or the ooh moment. The program with the highest engagement are our free family events, the Mission Invertebrate Roadshow and the Learning Team's Discovery Days. The MI Roadshow is great, and it's a fantastic way to just engage passers-by, not to mention the loyal followers who will go around every single park after them. They have a bugmobile, which has got lots of different habitats in each corner, and people can just walk on board and look for sort of stickers of bugs. And there's also a tabletop bug hunt and craft activities, log rolling and meadow sweeping, an invertebrate dressing up box, and professional storytellers who've specifically written a story around the invertebrates in the park. And even people who don't have kids will just come up and ask what we're doing. The roadshow moves around all 8 of the Royal Parks, but my favourite one is the one that's in Green Park because it coincides with the sheep grazing. Mudshoot Farm brings some sheep and sometimes even a Dexter cow to graze a designated section of meadow. And we're doing surveys of the species that were found there as a result of the different management techniques. And it's a little flock of sheep in the middle of central London, and that alone is an incredibly powerful tool to provoke conversation and engagement. And there's Farmer Tom who brings them in and watches over them and can tell you about every sheep, its name, how old it is, what breed it is, and can also talk about what they're doing and why they're doing it and why it's important. And so many people, they just can't help it. They have to walk over and see what's happening. We also go out into the local community and seek specific community groups to work with. In that work, our purpose is to reach people for whom there is a barrier, something stopping them or making them less likely to engage with us. One community group we worked with, they were fantastic. They were so excited and engaged and interested. And one of them turned to me and said, I live right by Hyde Park, but I haven't been here since 1987. And that really spoke to me. And I think that's what's a really important thing to remember whenever you're doing any sort of engagement. It's not only about creating engagement opportunities, it's about breaking down the barriers that are stopping people from engaging with the opportunities that are already there. The barrier that had stopped this woman from coming and enjoying and learning about nature for 20 odd years was the fact that this community group was made up of people who were not young and able-bodied anymore. It was too far to walk, and so they didn't come to the park because of that worry that they'd struggle to get back home or back to the road. And all it took to break that barrier, to get that group excited and interested and engaged, was to do the walking tour from an electric buggy. Simple as that. And I think that's such an important part of community engagement. It's not just about creating things that are interesting, exciting. It's about breaking down those barriers for those people who are interested and excited and want to learn, but can't. Now, our discovery days are fun and busy and bustling and exciting, but they can be overwhelming for children with SEND, especially autism. and we want them to be involved as well. We don't want to leave anyone on the sidelines. So we have a sensory room, which is quiet and darker and has some sensory plays activities in it, where anyone can just go and take a step out of the hubbub, have a little break from it all, until they're ready to go back and carry on. But that's not enough for everyone. The noise and the busyness was still a barrier, so we've started reaching out to local groups and letting them know when we're normally at our quietest, and also letting them know when we're actually opening an hour earlier than advertised, so that they can come in, secure in the knowledge that it definitely will be quiet for them. Our discovery days, which are 2 or 3 days every half term or school holiday, are where we open up the lookouts, which is a building in the middle of Hyde Park with the classrooms and the learning garden in it. We put on lots of activities for families, and things for teeny tiny babies to teenagers who've been dragged along with younger siblings, and sometimes just teenagers who've wandered in to use the loo and got a bit distracted. Each discovery day has a different theme. So brilliant birds or marvellous mammals, wonderful water. Yeah, we are quite fond of alliteration in our team. But there's a lot of different things to do. Short lead sessions, log rolling, pond dipping, craft activities, painting, building a bird's nest, storytelling, sensory play. In one of them, we actually put one of the GPS trackers that we use in the hedgehog surveys onto a toy hedgehog, hide it, and then give the kids goes with the receiver and have them run around and try to track down the hedgehog, which is always made a little bit more tricky when a dog finds the toy first. But I mean, the list of activities we do is endless. But the idea is that there's enough things to do for families to come and bring their lunch and just spend the day. And it's a chance for families who maybe wouldn't normally think that there was enough to do in the park to keep their kids entertained. It gives them the confidence to bring them along as well. We have some families who come every time and spend the day, others who are just wandering past and come in for 15, 20 minutes, others who were wandering past just plan to pop in, and then we have to chuck them out at the end of the day because they've enjoyed it so much that they've stayed. It's informative and it's fun and it's free and it's engaging for the kids and the parents alike. And we found it to be an absolutely fantastic model for engagement. And every time we get a couple of parents who, as a general rule, don't do nature. In my experience, most parents aren't really interested in having a lecture, especially when one of their darling little ones is covered in mud and the other one has just found a slug. So how do you engage parents? Well, in my experience, I found that there's 2 ways that normally work. One is to inspire the kids. It's really hard to ignore a 3-year-old running up to you and dragging you over to where they found a slug. And that pure, unadulterated awe and wonder that kids have, well, it's contagious and you can't really help but get involved. The other way I found is fast facts, single liners to hook interest. Would lice have gills? Oh, it's not injured, that hole's how it breathes. And the one that never fails, this one's a girl, because every time, like clockwork, how do you know? And it starts a conversation, an informal chat. It piques their interest without taking too much of their time because they have got children that they're trying to look after at the same time. But, and then a few minutes later, you overhear them telling their child what they just learnt. And that's incredible. That's so valuable that they've not only engaged with a bit of biology themselves, but the fact that they were then able to share that knowledge and excitement with their child. And these things I've talked about haven't all stopped this past year. We've adapted to the times. We have had to cancel some things and scale back in some places. Our Hedgehog Heroes went out in smaller groups over more nights, and our school sessions became virtual fieldwork, where the students are currently all joining from laptops at home. But we've also taken the opportunity to expand into other previously unexplored areas. In October, for example, we had our first online discovery week, which actually proved to be one of the most successful of all time. And we had almost 2,000 people sign up and had 5,113 attendees or views of our online events. And we had 2,000 people watching our lives and 1,000 people watching our pre-recorded. And in the feedback, the overwhelmingly favourite feature of the events was that they learned about nature and heritage. So that really shows that the interest and the ability to engage people with nature is still there, even if they can only engage with it virtually. Unsurprisingly, we're currently in the midst of organising our February half-term online Discovery Week, which we're hoping will be just as successful, if not more. And this past year, we've been working closely with and relying heavily on the expertise of our comms and digital team, because there are so many ways to engage people digitally. And we've been making PDF activity sheets and videos and doing Facebook Lives, and the Royal Park's Facebook account streamed live feeding of the Pelicans in St. James's Park. And people are encouraged to upload and share photographs. And people are encouraged to upload and sorry about that, and share their photographs. There we go. So that they can sort of share what they've seen on their walks with everyone else digitally as well. Even when it's a physical event, you need to get the word out that it's happening. Not only having it on your website, but also on social media, trying to get it into the Londonist, sending it out on mailing lists. Any way to get the word as far and as wide as possible. Because if you only tell people who've already said they're interested, you're not getting new engagements from further afield. The comms team really threw their weight behind an event that we did last March, before the first lockdown, which we weren't really sure if it was going to be successful. We're a little worried that we might not manage to get 5 schools who wanted to bring a specific age range or class for a specific session on a specific day, especially when that session is based outside and the day is in the middle of March. But because of the marketing behind it, we got 10 schools wanting to bring about 350 students, and we're having to turn schools away. This event needed all hands on deck, not just the comms team. We got all of the learning team, the learning volunteers, the arboriculture team, the volunteer team, and even the Mission Invertebrate team involved in Treemendous Trees, which was a multi-school, multidisciplinary day of inspiring and experiential activities as part of British Science Week. We had tree surgeons hanging out of an oak tree and students using loppers and building dead hedges. They were learning about how to identify a silver birch tree and how great it is at catching fire, making pivots out of hazel and giant pine cones, using trigonometry to measure trees for citizen science. And those kids left with grins spreading from ear to ear. And I think at least half of them decided there and then that they wanted to be tree surgeons when they grew up, because they'd never realised there was a job that involved climbing trees, using chainsaws and making zip wires. And the aim of the day was to throw all of these experiences at them so that they could see science in action, that it's not just sitting at a desk or learning from a book, but that there's so many incredible ways to apply it in nature. And actually, I think that goes for, sorry. And actually, I think that's what all of us try to do, really, when we're trying to engage people. We're throwing open the gates, welcoming people in and showing them, look at how amazing this all is. Okay, I'd like to thank you for listening. I hope that you've enjoyed my attempt to briefly cover the many facets and layers of engagement that we do in the parks, so that anyone to any level of their interest can engage with and connect to biology within the Royal Parks. I'm now going to open up the floor and ask if anyone's got any questions.